of the Ordinance Committee of the Board of Selectmen, and it's Wednesday, April 26th, just about 5 o'clock. And we've called to order, and first on our agenda would be minutes from our last meeting, which was November 15th, 2022. So did everyone get a chance to take a look at those? Does anyone want to make a motion to approve? All right. Second, all right. Any discussion or any changes, anything? All those in favor? Aye. That's unanimous. All right, now, we've got an agenda item, which is review and discuss next steps, and then we have several items underneath that. So I think what we'll basically do is have some discussion about these items and then make some plans for where we would like to go next as an ordinance committee, or whether we want to kind of report back to the Board of Selectmen on any of these items, and then we'll talk about scheduling some additional meetings. So with that said, first, a question regarding the establishment of town committees / commissions / boards. And what I would like to do is first review the requirements for an ad hoc committee versus a standing commission or board that's enabled through ordinance. There seem to be two different things. And I would turn to our town attorney if he could give us some information about what's the difference between the two.
Well, the commission obviously has a lifetime term. It doesn't expire unless the board of selectmen and the town do away with a particular ordinance for any commission. There's many commissions. There's no set duration. Sometimes an ad hoc committee has a set duration, and we've had some that don't have set duration. But commissions have no set duration. There's nothing in our ordinances that show that a commission expires. The ad hoc committee are usually appointed by the board, by the first selectman, and does not necessarily need the approval of the board of selectmen. However, I think that in recent history has come to the board of selectmen and indicated that this is what she felt was necessary with the discussion, and whether they were or not. There usually was some kind of agreement as to whether to go forward or not. The first selectman usually appoints the members to the ad hoc committee, where commissions are done by the board of selectmen. The ad hoc committee commissions are subject to minority representation, as is true of ad hoc committee. There's got to be a balance on the parties according with the minority representation statute of now. That's about it. Yeah, I don't
So
think of any other.
in order to have no end date, it has to go through ordinance and be established as a full commission.
Correct.
But it could be an ad hoc that doesn't specify, oh, it's only 1 year, it's only 18 months. So if it's an ad hoc, it doesn't need to go through ordinance at all. That's something.
No, right.
The first selectman is charged to do that.
Right.
And then what I'm hearing you say is that Beth has made it that she brings it to the board of selectmen, she brings the charge, and
Right.
there's usually a vote, which I think has been the case each time.
Exactly.
Okay.
But
yeah.
if I'm clear, ad hoc committees don't have special terms for the members,
Okay.
right? They don't like have terms that necessarily expire.
Correct.
So if we don't set a term limit on the ad hoc committee, we could have a committee around through a long time that would have terms that were undefined and unlimited.
That's probably true. Unlike a commission though, David.
Yeah.
Where a commission, can only be, repealed or ended.
Yeah.
By an ordinance change. An ad hoc committee can simply be ended by the board of selectmen or the first selectman who appoints them. There's no need for you anymore, it's over. So even though there's no specified term, they're in existence subject to the will of the will of the first selectman and or the board of selectmen.
But also the permanent, the commissions that are in ordinance have staggered terms of people who are required to meet certain party affiliations or, non-majority party affiliations and so forth, which is not true of the ad hoc committee.
No, the ad hoc committee generally should comply with minority representation.
So it's not required, but we try to do it, or?
No,
is it required?
well, I think if it was ever challenged, I think that, the freedom of the state would say, it's not freedom of information, that it's got a, the statute on minority representation, representation speaks in terms of committees, agencies.
Yeah,
So it doesn't say subcommittee, but I think a committee that is formed by the first selectman and or the board of selectmen should, and I believe it would be considered to be mandatory, comply with minority representation.
and with there isn't there normally, or does it absolutely need for an ad hoc committee to be established? Is it normally the board of selectmen that just maybe, I don't know how it gets proposed, maybe the first selectman says, we need an ad hoc committee, brings that to the board, or can those ad hoc committees be established just?
But the first selectman can establish, you know, and keep in mind, they have no authority and they're all,
Right.
advisory to the.
I'm just
So
asking
the
what
board,
the process
the
is.
first selectman could establish a committee on his or her own. But again, as Sheila indicated, and as I said, Beth is always, and I think I remember all the other members of the, all of the first selectmen. My memory and best recollection, all brought it before and said, the
It makes
reason for it, this is going to be the charge.
Sure.
And we will either take a vote on it, or if there's no strenuous objection and no adversarial discussion, it just happens.
Right.
So I will say that, so I know, for example, the government access, what became the Government Access Commission through ordinance began for many years in that as an ad hoc. So it's a process by which once the committee gets going and determines, okay, we're going to establish a government access television channel. We didn't have one when we began, so the committee was formed to do that. But then we said we need to continue to have some oversight. So our oversight ad hoc should turn into a commission, you know, a standing commission.
Right.
And so I think we went to, Ed Sheehy was first selectman at the time, and we asked him to take a look at making us into, and we proposed it, it came in front of this group as the ordinance, then it was recommended back to the Board of Selectmen, then there was a public hearing, and once that passed, now we have an ordinance about the Government Access Commission. So that's the process for any board of commissions. It's going to become, once they determine they need to be permanent. So I think the question came up most recently at our Board of Selectmen meeting about the Housing Committee.
Right.
Obviously, it was an ad hoc that made the recommendation for the housing plan. That was back in May. And then the idea was, I think going forward, was that that same group should take a look at now what does it mean once we have the plan. So if that group thinks it, so it was created as an ad hoc, and if it thinks that it should be a standing commission, maybe they can report back to the Board of Selectmen or the first selectman to say, we'd like to take the step of coming before this group, the ordinance committee, to, you know, begin the process of becoming a standing commission or not, if they determine that, you know, their work is going to wrap up in a certain amount of time, and then recommendations to TPZ, you know, take it from there, and they don't feel they need to continue, they may do that. But I think maybe if we just clarify that maybe the name is not clear, that the Housing Committee is an ad hoc. It's not the same ad hoc that created the original recommendations. It's just a different ad hoc.
But didn't the report that we said that we sent on,
And we accept it, yeah.
we accepted and sent to Hartford?
Yeah.
Didn't that report have in it the call to have a housing commission?
Right, so that was a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. So Beth moved forward with an ad hoc. If that wants to come back and say, oh yeah, now it's time to go from just an ad hoc to a full commission. And
I think that's where the confusion.
I don't know if it said, I don't know if it said a commission. I think it said that we would like, because we started our work, we would like to continue.
Yeah.
I think it never said as a commission. I think continue the ad hoc. I'm not 100% sure that they, but I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain that that's what it said. I don't think they ever said they needed to be a commission.
Yeah.
I think they said that the town should have a housing committee,
Committee, yeah.
permanent.
Right.
No, it didn't say permanent.
Well, I thought the implication was that it should be more than just,
Right.
I think it's a good idea to have a permanent committee or a commission.
Yeah, or a subcommittee of TPZ perhaps, because that, I mean, it seems to me that, housing is very much related to the plan of conservation and development and the
Sure.
regulations. And, right now, this ad hoc is advisory to the Board of Selectmen, which is great. They can come and make recommendations to it. But if they'd like to make recommendations to TPZ, that's not us, we're not TPZ, so, if they want to work more closely with TPZ and TPZ is interested in having a subcommittee as housing, maybe that's a path forward, but I would leave it to them to make a recommendation back to the Board of Selectmen. And for now, I think we should just clarify that that's an ad hoc. The one that exists right now is an ad hoc, it doesn't have an end date, but it's gonna make recommendations back to the Board of Selectmen.
Would you clarify that some of the other ad hocs, I guess ad hocs like the building committee?
That's true.
I think everybody should be.
We have several ad hocs, so.
There are lots of ad hocs. You should,
Yeah,
if you're gonna
yeah.
clarify one, you should clarify all.
That's true. So that might be something that can be accomplished on the website where the agendas are all listed, if they were all organized under, letter A for ad hoc and they were all listed in a row.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot. The DEI committee is an ad hoc, there's a community council that's an ad hoc, the 2030 task force is an ad hoc. And then there are 3 building committees. So we have lots of ad hocs.
well, and just with in respect to our strategic planning and keeping control of the budget, we don't want, there are some minor budgetary implications to every committee or commission.
Yeah.
Because they have needs.
Yeah, right.
And they always get budgets, so our budget gets bigger when we get more things.
Yeah.
So we don't want to necessarily carry, just because we've had them.
Right.
An ad hoc committee that
So-
isn't really necessary.
When you take the step to put it in ordinance, that's part of what the selectmen have to consider if we're making them.
Yeah, it's gonna be there. If we
Yeah.
put it in an ordinance, it's
Yeah.
gonna be there and it's gonna be
Do
budgeted.
we appropriate budgets for ad hoc?
Some of them, not ad hoc,
No.
I don't think there's, but there are staff costs that are associated. So for example, the building committee, absolutely has to have the minutes and agendas filed and recordings made. So there are ancillary
Like, those
costs.
people don't get paid extra to be, the staff. The ad hoc committee.
Well, it's part of our budget to hire the people to come here and do these things.
No, I think it's, they're asked to come to a few meetings at night and they do it as part of their job. I don't think they get stipends or extra overtime pay.
I think they might, well, let's find out.
Wait.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I could be wrong. Maybe they get some comp time the next day, but I don't think they.
Well,
get
I
paid.
think, for example, conservation, has, and we have Tim Austin in our audience tonight, but conservation has a line item for, I think it might be overtime actually, for the person who's taking minutes. So that's in the budget. That's not an ad hoc.
It's not a lot of money.
It's not an ad hoc.
That's
no.
not an ad hoc. But the housing committee has a staff person doing minutes.
I don't think anyone, Jerry Short, when she comes to the Board of Selectmen meeting, she doesn't get paid extra. You did get paid extra when you came to the Board of Selectmen meeting. Those people, as part of their job description, when they're hired, they know.
I can
that
understand,
They may be, they
I
may
can
be.
understand that for a salaried employee. I would only assume that people who might be on hourly contracts would, and I don't know.
I can't think of any hourly person who comes to an ad hoc staff meeting.
I can't either.
So then why do we, let's move on. Let's forget about that issue.
I'm
There
just,
is no budget attached to
but
ad hoc.
we think that there's no
committees.
budgetary implications in
Right,
it.
exactly.
That's the clarification.
Well, so that, all right, so I think that resolves our question A is, I think we have a good sense. Oh, the other requirement, Jerry, I was gonna ask you about, members of commissions have to be electors of the town of Woodbridge, which means, eligible to vote in the town of Woodbridge. Is that the same for ad hoc?
No, there's no requirement for that, but we have never put anybody, I don't believe, oh, the last 10 years, we put anybody who wasn't a vote.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
to your point, David, and you have a good point, is that when you add a commission, when you keep adding
Yeah.
commissions, those have budgetary
Yeah.
implications.
Yeah.
Ad hocs do not, so sometimes it is fiscally responsible to think of having ad hocs as opposed to commissions.
Yeah.
It's a good platform for somebody to run on.
Keep
I
it
haven't
going
noticed
down by making ad hocs, all right.
I haven't noticed very many people running on platforms lately.
Yes.
Well, we used to.
So I would say that unless we have further questions that we want resolved, and this first one about what the difference between ad hoc versus a standing commission, we all understand that a standing commission would have to come through this committee. We don't have any requests for that, so we're not taking any steps forward on that. So this question regarding the role of boards and commissions, with regard to either advising and recommending to the Board of Selectmen versus acting independent of the Board of Selectmen. How does it work, Jerry? The most of them, their role is to advise the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, how to the commission.
I guess either.
Well, specifically in the commission, charge, it mentions whether they're advisory or not. I
Right.
mean, conservation is, QPOP is,
Mhm.
I think we'd have to look at the ordinances to see which ones, police commission are not, fire commission are not.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of some that I don't believe human services are, they act on their own.
Right.
But some, if it's in charge in the ordinances, then they are advisory, but there's some that are not, there are lots of them.
Right.
Right,
So even-
finance is not.
Well, finance is not a commission, finance is a
Of the board.
Yeah.
But even something like recreation, we saw that, in order to hire, it's a recommendation that they bring forward, but then it goes through the Board of Selectmen's Personnel Committee and then up to the Board of Selectmen to make hiring decisions. So,
But recreation does programs on their own, they don't have to come to the board.
yeah, they have some authority is already delegated to
The
them.
matter, I think that there are probably less commissions that are advisory than there are non-advisory. I think of some of those commissions that we have, they do things on their own, they don't have to.
Are all ad hoc committees essentially advisory? Is that?
Yes, well, they can't act on their own. That's a big distinction.
All right. So with regard to these questions, do we have enough information for this? We understand that these advisory committees are advisory to the Board of Selectmen. Board of Selectmen has to take action to do any of the major things that need to be done on behalf of the town, but people are not sort of deputized to do that on their own. All right, so then the next item on our agenda tonight was to go back to take a look through this ordinances, which is, these are all, so section 75-1 through 75-86, these are all our municipal agencies, which includes all our boards, commissions that are standing. And I think we were asked to look at this as an ordinance committee with the thought in mind that we might want to do some consolidation. I think that's something kind of ongoing. I think that we should continue considering this. We do have a lot of boards and commissions. And so depending on what your thoughts are here on this committee, I think we made some attempts, back when we had liaisons, we asked each of the Board of Selectmen liaisons to go back and talk to the boards and commissions about meeting less frequently, meeting jointly, thinking about merging together. I can think of, for example, the economic development and maybe the agricultural commission, because that deals with one sector of economic development, right, the farmers. Maybe if they want to explore meeting jointly and think about whether they'd like to merge. I think that's something to encourage, if this group feels that we should continue encouraging that.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it's in our strategic plan as well. So.
Yeah. I mean, where it makes sense, it should be done. It's just, you spread yourself out with so many committees and commissions.
Yeah.
It's hard, you really don't get very much information back because you don't have time to listen to 70 different commissions.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily function effectively if they don't have oversight. So it's hard for any first selectman, certainly, to give oversight, or even for the full board to have oversight of that much activity.
Right. And there are some overlaps that naturally like to make sure that everybody was on the same page, or at least knew that the other committee was doing things. So Again, with economic development, they talked about what 2030 was going to be recommending in the business district, and they wondered where does it kind of come together. Now, there have been, I think it's the Economic Development Commission chairman who's now been appointed to 2030. So that's a very good example of trying to merge up what these committees are doing. So maybe that'll eventually be a recommendation to us to merge those two groups. I would certainly be open to that because we do bring people on board in an ad hoc and we get them very interested in the topic and then they become experts on that topic and then they'd be great members of permanent commission.
Well, they tend to take smaller pieces of what that commission might be doing.
Yeah.
And focus on one area, one specific issue that needs some attention.
Right, so they bring that to the bigger commission.
I think that'd be a good thing to look at related to ad hoc commissions, ad hoc committees where they might, where their purpose might fit as a subcommittee too.
Yeah.
Can commissions appoint subcommittees that don't involve their own commissioners? Can they reach outside and get expertise outside of that? That sounds like a little sketchy, maybe.
There's no prohibition in it, but I don't see why they would do that. It could be an informal, Joe, why don't you take care, you've been coming to our meeting, you're very interested, why don't you come back and report to us on something? I think that's what they can do that.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to your question, but all I can say is there's no prohibition against doing that.
I think at one time, Coopop had a subcommittee that looked at the center of town, back when where should we build the library question. So that was a subcommittee that I think had a library commissioner on it and maybe a recreation commissioner. So, yeah, I mean, that might be like a special purpose subcommittee of a standing commission. And how do they do that, Jerry? They just go, like, the commission itself says we're gonna create a subcommittee.
Yeah.
But then they have to notice meetings, take minutes, et cetera, even subcommittees, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They have to be minority.
Oh, yeah, that's another piece as well.
Well, noticing all those requirements are hard to keep track of. You have a lot,
Right, it gets terrible. Yeah.
Our town clerk comes and tells us that, remember?
Yeah, there's all that stuff.
She talks about how many they're trying to keep track of. So.
Yeah.
All right, so I think in general, it sounds like we'd like to, and I'll have a conversation with Beth about maybe we can get some communication out to boards and commissions to
Sure.
talk to them about how they might want to work together. Okay. All right, so next we had inclusionary zoning concepts that might be enacted by ordinance versus land use regulation, right? That's the other way to do inclusionary zoning. So I saw in the newspaper just maybe a week ago that New Haven was, there was an item being enacted and they referenced that they have an ordinance for inclusionary zoning and they were talking about a project that started before that ordinance. So I wonder if that's something, I don't know if we could contact New Haven and ask them if we could get a copy of their ordinance. I was not able to find it when I looked at their, whatever they have online.
And I'm not sure what their procedures for enacting an ordinance, the public hearing, and board of aldermen. I think that New Haven, I think the cities do have ordinances that speak in terms of zoning, I think.
Oh.
I'm not sure exactly how they do it, what their requirement was in their charter.
Right.
Or not, that allows them to do it, and it may be a charter provision that allows them to do that.
Right.
So we have to take a careful look at it.
Maybe this is something that, I actually attended the SCROG meeting today because Beth was not able to attend. And they have a new, planning, staffer there who said that there are some best practices for things like this. And
Yeah.
if the town requested a report from them, they could put something together.
That's a good point, because the guy before him was very, very helpful.
Eugene.
Eugene.
Yeah.
We went to him and
Yes, yeah.
so that was a new person that's good and can help us on that.
So maybe that's something we can do. We can request some best practice when it comes to this, whether we can do anything in ordinance as a town, or whether that's only for cities to do. And then find out what the best practice and see what other people are doing and get that back to the board of selectmen.
You mean like in other towns like ours?
Yeah, Sprague area,
As opposed to New Haven?
right,
Yeah,
yeah, so Bethany, Orange, West Haven, and Milford, that's the Sprague area. North Haven, Hampton. So, I mean, the more we can do, in a regional approach, I think the better. I think, you know, if they have resources and for the asking, they'll supply us with information, great. And maybe we can proceed that way for that. So next was the review of the research regarding the latest state and federal recommendations on PFAS, which is the environmental chemicals. Do we know what's happening?
so the only thing I think you all know that the Fed has adopted some pretty strict requirements on PFAS. And one of them is water companies, local water companies will be, monitoring, looking for, I don't know how they do it, I don't know whether they test water supplies, but the local water companies are now going to have the authority to test for PFAS in water supplies, but I guess that's only in public water systems and not private wells. And I know the state still has not had a final report on it from its committee with regard to what the legislation we're going to take in terms of today.
Is this suggesting an ordinance toward that?
Yeah, so it has been kind of hanging on our list, right? It was a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen 2 years ago now. 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago?
With the field up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a, you know, petition or something that came out, or just some individuals?
Yeah, so there was an interest in looking at whether we should have an ordinance. There was a whole bunch of testimony at the ordinance level. This is the previous ordinance committee before you.
Yeah.
It came back to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen said, you know, you need to look at this more in ordinance. And so it's been sitting on the ordinance agenda each time we take a look to see what are our issues. That one's been there. So there has been new developments at the federal level. The question of whether it's come down to the state level yet, or if there's any guidelines. I think that, when does the legislative session end?
And the June 7th, I think.
We've got about another month before we're gonna know for
We
sure.
can check to see if they're doing anything.
What kind of an ordinance would you envision us to be able to deal with all these private wells? I think that's pretty.
No, it would be,
Testing, is that something? Is that
No, it wouldn't be testing, it would be preventing PFAS from being.
preventing it from being leached into?
right,
Used.
The use. Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we didn't already have the synthetic field over there, if we had a prohibition,
Right,
it probably wouldn't have been able to be put there without eliminating all the PFAS.
correct.
so,
In your estimation, when they, 5 years from now have to totally replace that field and take the, take all that stuff off, if there were an ordinance, would that then make them have to put something back down that didn't have any PFAS, or would there be?
And if it was grandfathered, if we looked into grandfathered existing, PFAS
Oh,
facilities, or, field.
so the ordinance would have to grandfather.
Ordinance could grandfather, yeah, if it's grandfathered.
But if it just said from this point forward, no PFAS, then there would be.
right, so additional fields, could be. So if they decided the baseball field was next, then the soccer field.
Right,
Softball
right,
field, the
right.
whole campus is gonna be
Right.
artificial turf at some point.
But the artificial turf issue is really that it seems great as an environmental thing now, but it just becomes another big environmental hazard because they don't have any way to recycle these fields and they replace them every 5 to 8 years. So now you have, instead of rubber tires problem, you have a
Ground up rubber
used
tires.
field problem.
And I think the concern was, at the time, does it get into the water supply?
Yeah.
And into people's.
Yeah, the local residents were very concerned about that. I understand that 100%. I think that's a very valid issue for everybody.
Yeah. So
We're on wells. We're not on a system that monitors that kind of thing.
yeah, so it's entirely possible that the ordinance committee, the last time we dealt with an environmental hazard, we went through ordinance for the anti-fracking ordinance. That was something that was happening around the state, and there was a consultant who came and told us what other municipalities were doing. So there was a lot of guidance on what sort of fracking ban would be effective, which was just to keep things from traveling through your town. And we enacted that. It went through ordinance, we went to a public hearing, and the Board of Selectmen enacted that ordinance, so.
Jerry, do we have a lot of environmental ordinance type things here?
No, we have an ordinance that says you can't use pesticides on publicly owned properties, that's environmental. Think of any other.
Or is that a ordinance?
Sure, maybe that's a policy.
I think it might be
a
policy.
policy.
Yeah.
I don't recall that.
For town-owned
Yeah.
property.
I don't think we have any, no, I don't think we have any. ordinances.
Just curious.
Just the fracking. And then all the solid waste ordinance, that's all ordinance, and it has to do with the public works garage and the transfer station, all those sorts of things, but those are standard.
I think we might have adopted something, I remember a couple of years ago, some woman came and,
That's the fracking one.
that's the practice.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Things like public burning, which could be construed as an environmental thing, are
That's
prohibited
the
by
ordinance.
ordinance, right?
That's an ordinance.
So,
Firearms too, that was the other one, if you want to think of environmental hazards too.
well, I mean,
That's
the,
an
you know,
ordinance
the
as well.
particulates and fumes of.
Yeah, they're big particulates, they're smaller. All right, so I think that, again, we're gonna, need to receive further information on this. I would love some guidance if somebody's got model ordinance somewhere that other municipalities in Connecticut are considering, I would like to take it up. If we have to invent it ourselves, I think that's a completely different, ballgame. So, all right, so with regard to scheduling next meeting, it seems as though we're gonna continue on an ad hoc basis as we decide we need meetings, unless you guys feel we should have standing meetings. We just said we didn't want to have too much government, right, and too many meetings, but
No, we need government. I'm not worried
Yeah.
about that. Maybe we don't need meetings all the time.
yeah,
So why don't we just have as needed basis?
As needed.
Yeah.
That seems to me to be reasonable. I think that these things come up. On the commissions, there's something in our charter about, petitioning for a committee or something to be formed. Is that a real thing?
One thing in our charter.
There's something in our charter about, I remember reading it about citizens petitioning for like 50 people get
Citizens
together.
can petition for an ordinance.
They can petition for an ordinance, but there's a different
oh, right.
level of petitioning to ask for, I don't know whether it's an ad hoc committee on something or maybe we just need to look into
I'll
it.
look at it, I'll look.
Yeah, it seemed kind of strange to me and maybe I was just misreading it, but I
I'll take a look.
Petition for.
I don't really remember. It would be interesting to know where the citizens can petition for things that they think we need.
Well, they can,
They can always.
They said they can petition for an ordinance and an ordinance could. be
Could
another
create,
commission,
could
yeah,
create a committee,
or a commission.
certain, or committee, yeah.
So that's the way you do it, yeah. All right, so until we hear from, anybody who wants us to meet again, we're gonna stand without a standing meeting set up here.
Normally, do we need, because then would you think that the Board of Selectmen would say, I think we need to meet, or first selectman certainly?
Yeah, I think I sort of have power as the chair to call for a
Okay.
meeting.
Well, I would assume that.
Yeah, because that's
But,
basically
I
how
mean,
this one
If
happened.
you didn't happen to call for it, do you think if, I mean, Beth, I would assume didn't call for meetings as well,
Yeah, she
but,
asked us to meet, yeah.
but
You make
would,
a request.
Yeah.
Sheila.
And listen, if either of you as members want us to meet, just let me know.
sure, yeah, no,
I'll set something
no,
up.
I think that.
Yeah.
I just wondering what the process would be, so.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need quarterly meetings, that may not coincide with when we want to meet, so I think if we just leave it as it is.
Perfect.
That sound good?
Sounds great.
Other than that, I think we need a motion to adjourn. Second for motion to
Second.
adjourn. It's non-debatable, all those in favor?
We're done.
Ta-da.
We're thinking 10:06.
Well,
Perfect.
We got
Good going,
it
Sheila.
out ahead of time.
Feelings organized.
That's right, yeah, move us forward.
Coach, yes.